You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. Initiated in 2022, Project 2025 is a scheme aiming to overhaul the U.S. executive branch should there be a Republican triumph in the upcoming 2024 presidential election. The Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, is spearheading this ambition, orchestrating the mass mobilization of conservatives to the nation's capital to supplant what the project labels as the deep state, entrenched civil servants, thereby advancing the agenda of a future Republican president. The project isn't officially endorsing any particular Republican Party presidential hopeful. Nevertheless, numerous affiliates maintain a close rapport with Donald Trump and his 2024 bid for the presidency. Project 2025 champions an aggressive interpretation of the Unitary executive theory, which posits that the president wields unilateral authority over the executive branch. This outlook would inform a swift takeover of the executive upon the new president's swearing in. Collaboration for this initiative extends to around 80 conservative groups, including Turning Point USA, helmed by Charlie Kirk, the Conservative Partnership Institute with Mark Meadows as a senior partner, the Center for Renewing America, led by Russell Vought, and America First Legal, headed by Stephen Miller, all linked to Trump's governing circle. The project's blueprint calls for broad and transformative reforms throughout the government, especially regarding economic and social policy and the scope of federal operations and agencies. Among its radical suggestions are dramatic cutbacks in the Department of Justice budget, the disbanding of the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, and the dissolution of the Departments of Education and Commerce. The Washington Post, referencing an unnamed insider, reported that the plan also encompasses the immediate activation of the Insurrection Act of 1807 to assign military duties for domestic law enforcement and instigate Department of Justice action against Trump's foes. Paul Dance, a previous Trump administration staffer and project overseer, encapsulated the project's essence in a September 2023 statement, describing it as a strategic preparation to usher in a new army of ideologically primed conservatives poised to clash with the established bureaucratic order. The main tools of Project 2025 consist of a directive playbook, mandate for leadership, the conservative promise, a personnel registry seeking contributions, digital coursework dubbed the Presidential Administration Academy, and resources for framing transition strategies. Responses to Project 2025 have been stark. Critics, including legal scholars, have tagged it as authoritarian and a potential step towards autocracy in the U.S., endangering the constitutional balance of power and the rule of law. Some conservatives and Republicans have voiced their disapproval as well, with particular disquiet expressed about the project's stance on climate change. Since its inception in 1981, the Heritage Foundation has aligned its release of a new Mandate for Leadership report with each presidential election cycle. The latest installment, entitled Mandate for Leadership, A Conservative Promise, released in April 2023, marks the earliest unveiling in the series' history. The Heritage Foundation regards this report as its policy Bible. Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, initiated Project 2025 in the previous year. This project is designed to supply the Republican presidential candidate of 2024 with a comprehensive database of personnel along with a conservative ideological framework. This initiative was prompted by the reluctance of federal employees to back former President Trump's actions. These included Trump's attempt to enact a ban on travelers from predominantly Muslim countries, his effort to appoint a new attorney general to assist in challenging the outcome of the 2020 election, and his contentious statement, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts," in response to protests following George Floyd's death. In April 2023, the Heritage Foundation's new blueprint, spanning an extensive 920 pages, was crafted by a diverse group of conservative contributors, with former Trump administration officials being among the most notable. It has been documented that about half of the organizations that collaborated on this project are financially supported through dark money, anonymous donations funneled through a network of fundraising entities. These groups are associated with Leonard Leo, a significant conservative benefactor and influential player in steering the selection process for Trump's federal judge nominees. Project 2025 is supported by an expansive network of over 80 conservative groups, predominantly featuring think tanks, but also encompassing academic institutions and the American Conservative magazine. The initiative's leadership guide, known as the Mandate for Leadership, credits its insights to a group of contributors with ties to the Trump administration. This roster of contributors includes Jonathan Berry, Ben Carson, Ken Cuccinelli, Rick Dearborn, Thomas Gilman, Mandy Gunasekera, Gene Hamilton, Christopher Miller, Bernard McNamee, Stephen Moore, Maura Namdar, Peter Navarro, William Perry Pendley, Diana Furchtgott-Roth, Kieron Skinner, Roger Severino, Hans von Spakovsky, Brooks Tucker, Russell Vought, and Paul Winfrey, all of whom served in various capacities under President Trump. The Heritage Foundation's president, Kevin Roberts, has expressed his concerns about the current state of the United States in the foreword to the mandate. He regards the federal government as overly powerful and hostile to conservative American citizens and values, claiming freedom and liberty are under siege as never before. Citing Roberts, "The long march of cultural Marxism through our institutions has come to pass. The federal government is a leviathan, weaponized against American citizens and conservative values." Project 2025, led by Paul Dans, who previously was the Chief of Staff at the Office of Personnel Management during Trump's presidency, and Spencer Chrétien, formerly a special assistant to Trump, aims to reorient major federal agencies with conservative governance principles. Dans, contributing to the project's central document, outlines its structure upon four foundational components. The first component is a detailed book titled Mandate for Leadership: The Conservative Promise, which encapsulates the conservative view on federal management across various chapters. Secondly, a personnel database intended for the president-elect's team will be compiled, with public submissions welcomed. The third component is the Presidential Administration Academy, an online platform designed for instruction. Lastly, a playbook is included for establishing agency transition teams, triggered by the president's oath-taking phrase, "So help me God." In contrast, but in alignment with Project 2025's educational initiative, Trump proposed a federally funded American Academy that would exclude wokeness or jihadism while providing free educational courses and degrees. To support this, Trump suggested imposing taxes on major university endowments he accuses of indoctrinating students with extremist ideologies. According to Axios, Project 2025 has informed other Republican candidates for the 2024 presidential primaries, although it shows a close alignment with Trump due to the involvement of his loyalists, including Johnny McEntee as a senior advisor. Despite this, the 2024 Trump campaign maintains that no external entity represents Trump's stance officially, with Agenda 47 highlighted as the legitimate outline for a future Trump presidency. This comes even as some external plans appear to mirror Trump's own rhetoric. The Trump campaign made attempts to detach itself from unspecified groups' plans, emphasized by a statement released by two campaign officials, which, as reported by the New York Times, appeared more as an attempt to discourage those groups from contacting the press rather than an outright disavowal. Subsequently, Axios reported potential candidates for high-level positions in a future Trump administration that evince a desire to aggressively confront adversaries, as expressed by individuals like Kash Patel and Mike Davis, who have openly discussed punitive actions against critics in the government and media. Trump himself has made statements resonating with Project 2025's themes, albeit without explicit endorsement, asserting his willingness to use the power of the presidency against his adversaries and to dismantle what he calls the deep state. Furthermore, Trump has claimed an intent to appoint a special prosecutor, targeting who he considers the most corrupt president in the history of the United States of America, Joe Biden, and the entire Biden crime family. The initiative being discussed proposes a range of plans for adjusting the economy, with suggestions that range from moderate to extreme changes. It challenges the operations of the U.S. Federal Reserve, alleging that it plays a significant role in causing economic fluctuations. As alternatives, the project promotes the idea of either allowing banks to operate without central regulation or reinstating currency systems backed by physical commodities like gold. Furthermore, the project suggests that the Federal Reserve should stop trying to achieve full employment as a goal and concentrate solely on maintaining price stability. In terms of tax policy, the project proposes simplifying individual income tax rates to two levels, a lower 15% rate and a higher 30% rate for earnings exceeding the threshold defined by the Social Security wage base. This structure is promoted with the intent of creating a more even tax burden on income past a certain allowance. The proposal also includes reducing the rate of corporate tax to 18%, with the project labeling this particular tax as the most detrimental within the American tax framework. Once these changes are in place, the project advocates for a safeguard mechanism where any legislative efforts to increase individual or corporate income tax rates would require a 3/5 majority to pass. This recommendation seeks to establish a strong safeguard to maintain the suggested tax arrangement. In the blueprint for policy action laid out by Project 2025, Severino, who serves as the Vice President for Domestic Policy for the Heritage Foundation, argues that it is both an ethical and legal necessity for the Food and Drug Administration to re-examine and potentially revoke its initial endorsement of the abortion-inducing drugs mifepristone and misoprostol. He also suggests that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention ought to revise its communication to the public to emphasize the high effectiveness of contemporary fertility awareness-based methods for contraception. Furthermore, Severino proposes that the United States Department of Health and Human Services enforce a requirement for all states to provide detailed records of abortion incidents, including the number of procedures, the gestational age of the fetus, the reasons for the abortion, the state of residence of the mother and the method utilized for the abortion. Within the documents section on the Department of Justice, Jean Hamilton urges for the strict application of federal laws that prohibit the use of the United States Mail Service for the distribution of medications that can cause abortions. The initiative aims to reintroduce a proposition from the Trump era, which was to add a question to the United States Census regarding an individual's citizenship status. The outcome of the census is crucial because it determines the allocation of seats in Congress and the distribution of votees in the Electoral College. The Trump administration had claimed that including the citizenship question was to aid in the enforcement of the Voting Rights Act by preventing discrimination based on race or language. However, the Supreme Court judged this rationale to be insincere and did not permit the question to be part of the 2020 census. Additionally, according to the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, the enumeration for redistribution of congressional seats should be based on the total population in each state, not just the number of citizens. Project 2025 is a set of proposals aimed at revising current methods of addressing climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Diana Furchtgott-Roth, who leads on energy and climate issues at the Heritage Foundation, has stated that Americans ought to increase their utilization of natural gas, despite it being a potent greenhouse gas. The plan from Project 2025 calls for various reversals of existing climate policies, such as the annulment of the Inflation Reduction Act, which directs $370 billion to support clean technology initiatives. Additionally, the project seeks to shut down the Loan Programs Office within the U.S. Department of Energy to remove climate change considerations from the deliberations of the U.S. National Security Council and to push ally countries toward reliance on fossil fuels. Embracing policies that encourage Arctic drilling, Project 2025 also acknowledges what it sees as a governmental duty to exploit the nation's oil, gas, and coal reserves. One of its goals is to overturn a decision made by the Environmental Protection Agency in 2009 recognizing carbon dioxide emissions as a detriment to public health, a decision that currently empowers federal regulation of greenhouse gases. The climate-related content of Project 2025 was penned by multiple writers, among them Mandi Gunasekara, who previously held the Chief of Staff position at the Environmental Protection Agency and played a notable role in the United States' withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, verified by her own admission. Bernard McNamee, with a history of advising fossil fuel entities, contributed to the sections outlining the Environmental Protection Agency's responsibilities under Project 2025. It is noteworthy that 4 leading authors of the report have a record of publicly denying climate change. Project 2025 is a controversial agenda aimed at consolidating the U.S. executive branch under the President's complete authority, challenging the autonomy of various federal agencies such as the Department of Justice, the Federal Communications Commission, and the Federal Trade Commission. Its proponents champion an extreme interpretation of the unitary executive theory, which posits that the President holds exclusive executive power as granted by Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution. Donald Trump, a leading candidate for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination, has publicly embraced this theory. Trump was quoted in 2019 saying, "I have the right to do whatever I want as president," aligning with common beliefs held by unitary executive theory supporters. He made similar assertions in 2018 concerning his capacity to dismiss special counsel Robert Mueller. Although Trump is not alone in considering policies related to this theory, the Republican Party has especially embraced it since the September 11th attacks. In a report from November 2023, The Washington Post unveiled that utilizing the military for domestic policing via the Insurrection Act would be a top action item should Trump win a second term. Jeffrey Clark, who is taking a lead role in this part of the plan, is both a former Trump legal ally and a senior fellow at the Center for Renewing America, which collaborates with Project 2025. There are claims that the initiative could also involve the Department of Justice in going after individuals whom Trump views as unfaithful or political rivals. However, a heritage spokesperson refuted the validity of these intentions after the story surfaced. The language in Project 2025's documentation harshly labels Department of Justice, Environmental Protection Agency, and United States Agency for International Development employees as radical left ideologues and embedded activists. Addressing the growing anxiety over potential abuses of power during a televised town hall in December 2023 in Davenport, Iowa, Fox News anchor Sean Hannity questioned Trump about potentially misusing presidential powers to enact revenge. Trump enigmatically mentioned, "except for day one," before diverting the conversation to other topics. Severino has advocated for the revocation of regulations within the United States Department of Health and Human Services that prevent discrimination based on various aspects of an individual's sexuality and gender identity, including sexual orientation and transgender status. In the introduction to the 2023 edition of Mandate for Leadership, Roberts expresses a stark viewpoint on the state of society's moral fabric, particularly criticizing what he sees as the widespread promotion of transgender ideology and the inappropriate exposure of children to sexual content. He emphatically states, pornography should be outlawed. Roberts demands strict legal consequences for those involved in its production, distribution, and access, calling for the producers and distributors of such content to face imprisonment. Moreover, he believes that educators and public librarians who distribute such material should be treated as registered sex offenders, and he advocates for the forceful closure of any telecommunication and technology companies that enable the distribution of pornography. In the introductory section of the Project 2025 manifesto, the author Roberts presents a critical viewpoint on the prevalence of pornography, which he suggests is evident through the widespread dissemination of transgender ideology and the sexualization of children. Roberts vehemently states that pornography should not be shielded by the First Amendment, as it does not deserve such protection. He goes on to label those involved in the creation and distribution of pornographic content as exploiters and equates them to child predators. Roberts stresses that pornography is as harmful and addictive as any illegal substance, and that it can cause immense psychological harm comparable to criminal acts. Roberts calls for strict repercussions, advocating for the criminalization of pornography, with producers and distributors facing incarceration. He further insists that educators and librarians who promote such content be categorized as registered sex offenders and proposes that companies enabling the spread of pornography be forcibly closed. Roberts's uncompromising stance is encapsulated in his declaration: pornography should be outlawed, the people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned, educators and public librarians who purvey it should be classed as registered sex offenders, and telecommunications and technology firms that facilitate its spread should be shuttered. Project 2025 is a program that has been shaped by the ideological principles of former President Donald Trump. This initiative includes a system for assessing prospective candidates through a questionnaire designed to gauge their alignment with the aims of the project. During Trump's time in office, he often faced criticism for dismissing individuals he perceived as disloyal, irrespective of their ideological leanings. This was observed in cases such as the removal of William Barr, the former Attorney General. In the latter part of his presidency, James Bacon and John McEntee, who were part of the White House Presidential Personnel Office, formulated a questionnaire that was aimed at evaluating the dedication of potential government staff members to the principles of Trumpism. Both Bacon and McEntee became part of Project 2025 in May 2023. This project is in harmony with Trump's prior intentions to terminate a larger number of government employees than the president typically has authority to do. This objective was partially enabled by Schedule F, a job classification that Trump created through an executive order in July 2020. However, this classification was later revoked by President Joe Biden in January 2021. Nonetheless, Trump had expressed a desire to reinstate it. The Heritage Foundation is involved in supporting this initiative, with a target to compile a list of 20,000 personnel by the end of 2024 for their database. Russell Vought, who previously served in Trump's administration and now leads the Center for Renewing America, commented on the objective of Project 2025. He described its aim to remove federal workers as a wrecking ball for the administrative state. This quote from Vought underlines the transformative impact that the project seeks to have on the structure of federal employment. Donald B. Ayer, who served as the Deputy Attorney General under President George Herbert Walker Bush, expressed serious concerns about Project 2025, describing it as a collection of proposals that could empower Donald Trump to act dictatorially and eliminate the constraints inherent in the United States system. Ayer sees this as a potential devastation of the rule of law. He warns that Trump's intentions, if implemented, could fundamentally violate American core values and threaten everyone's safety. Michael Bromwich, a former Justice Department Inspector General, commented on the alarming nature of Trump's followers' efforts to manipulate the Department of Justice and Federal Bureau of Investigation for personal vendettas, which he argues would undermine anyone who values the rule of law. He points to the narrative, fueled by Trump and the right-wing media, accusing the current Department of Justice of being politically biased as particularly damaging. Regarding civil service, Max Stier and other critics worry that Project 2025 could mark a regression to a patronage system that preceded merit-based employment, mandatory since the Pendleton Act of 1883. Steve Bannon, among others, has publicly supported this on his podcast, which has included discussions with Jeffrey Clark and others involved with Project 2025. Donald Moynihan, a public policy professor, highlights that an initiative like Schedule F under this project could undermine constitutional oaths by demanding loyalty to the president over the Constitution itself. Law professor Peter M. Shane cites a New York Times quote regarding Russ Vought's frustration with conservative hesitancy to act on Trump's wishes. Vought dismisses the traditional independence of the Department of Justice from presidential pressures, seeking a more compliant mindset within the legal circles of conservative administration. Journalists Spencer Ackerman and Chauncey DeVega, along with academic Tom Nichols and journalist David Korn, have expressed grave concerns that Project 2025 could enable Trump to sidestep democracy and move toward autocracy, with possibilities like jailing opponents and crushing civil rights. Ackerman and De Vega specifically see the project as a potential dictatorship roadmap. Authored by Guthrie Graves Fitzsimmons for MSNBC, an article denounces the project's aspects that cater to Christian nationalism and oppositions to progressive marriage laws like the Respect for Marriage Act. The LGBTQ+ community has strongly criticized Project 2025 for intentions to strip away protections and possibly outlaw content deemed as promoting transgender ideology. Bryn Tannehill of Dame magazine and Ari Drennan of Media Matters for America underscore the project's proposals linking pornography to transgender topics, seeing a broader anti-LGBTQ+ agenda. On climate policy, there's Republican dissent regarding Project 2025's stance. Sarah Hunt from the Joseph Rainey Center for Public Policy, Utah Representative John Curtis, and Benji Backer from the American Conservation Coalition all argue for the GOP to endorse sound climate policy, with Backer noting that younger Republicans increasingly accept human contributions to climate change, thus opposing Project 2025's perspective.